The blizzard had been howling for 3 days straight when Eleanor Walsh heard the first crack above her head, a sound like the world splitting open that sent her heart plummeting into her stomach. She barely had time to stumble backward from the cook stove before the entire roof of her small cabin collapsed inward, bringing with it what felt like half the mountain's worth of snow. The crushing weight slammed her to the floor, burying her in an instant beneath timber and ice and suffocating darkness. She could not scream because she could not breathe, could not move because the debris pinned her legs, could only think in frantic spirals that this was how she would die, alone in the Utah wilderness, 23 years old with nothing to show for the life she had tried so desperately to build. Eleanor had come to Kelton, Utah, 6 months earlier with dreams that now seemed foolish in their optimism. She had inherited a small plot of land from a distant uncle she had never met, a man whose will had named her specifically because he had no children of his own, and she had been the only family member to write him letters during his final years. The lawyer in Philadelphia had made it sound almost romantic, this windfall inheritance in the Wild West, but the reality had been harsh and unforgiving from the moment she stepped off the train. The cabin was little more than 4 walls and a questionable roof even then, and the nearest neighbor was miles away through treacherous mountain terrain. Still, Eleanor had been determined. She had left behind nothing in Philadelphia except poverty and the constant scrutiny of distant relatives who thought her unmarriageable and strange for wanting to read books instead of simply finding a husband. The West had promised freedom, and she had been willing to pay whatever price that freedom demanded. She had spent the summer and fall teaching herself to hunt small game, to preserve food, to chop wood and haul water and all the 1,000 small skills required for survival. She had been proud of her calloused hands and her growing confidence. Now, crushed beneath the ruins of her home, she wondered if pride was what would kill her. Time became meaningless in the darkness. She drifted in and out of consciousness, fighting to take shallow breaths in the small pocket of air that remained near her face. Her legs had gone numb, which frightened her more than the pain had. She tried to pray but could not remember the words. She tried to think of her family, but found she resented them too much to want them as her last thoughts. Instead, she thought of spring, of the wildflowers she had seen blooming in the meadow below her cabin, of the way the morning light looked on the mountains. She was thinking of light when she heard the digging. At first, she thought she was hallucinating, that her oxygen-starved brain was inventing rescue because reality was too bleak to bear. But the sounds grew louder and more distinct, the rhythmic thud of wood being moved, the scrape of a shovel against debris, and then, impossibly, a voice. "Hello, is anyone alive in there?" The voice was deep and rough, worn like old leather, unmistakably real. Eleanor tried to shout but could only manage a weak croak. She tried again, forcing air through her constricted throat, and this time produced something closer to a cry. The digging intensified immediately, becoming almost frantic. "Hold on," the voice commanded. "Hold on, I am coming." Eleanor held on. She had no other choice. She focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on the sounds of her rescue drawing closer. She heard cursing, colorful and inventive, as whoever was digging encountered particularly stubborn pieces of timber. She heard the grunt of effort, the heavy breathing of hard labor. She heard determination, and it gave her hope. When the weight finally lifted from her upper body, the rush of cold air was so sharp it hurt. She gasped and coughed, her lungs burning as they expanded fully for the first time in hours. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her as she convulsed with the effort of breathing. "Easy," the voice said, gentler now. "Easy, just breathe. You are safe now." Eleanor forced her eyes open and found herself staring up at the most imposing man she had ever seen. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall and built like he had been carved from the mountain itself, all broad shoulders and thick muscle visible even through his heavy coat. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back roughly with a leather cord, and his face was all hard angles softened only slightly by a full beard. But his eyes, gray as storm clouds, held a concern that seemed almost at odds with his fierce appearance. "Can you move your legs?" he asked, already shifting position to examine where she was still pinned. Eleanor tried and felt a shooting pain that made her gasp. "Yes, it hurts, but I can feel them." "Good." He nodded once, decisive. "That is good. I am going to lift this beam. When I do, I need you to pull yourself free." "Can you do that?" "I think so." "Do not think." "No." His eyes met hers with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He lifted the heavy beam as though it weighed nothing, muscles straining against his coat, and Eleanor dragged herself forward on her elbows. The moment she was clear, he dropped the beam and was beside her again, his hands surprisingly gentle as they checked her legs for brakes. "I do not think anything is broken," he said after a moment. "But you cannot stay here. This whole structure could collapse further." He looked around at what remained of her cabin and shook his head. "It is not fit for anything now except firewood." "But all my things," Eleanor protested weakly, "are not worth your life." He was already moving, gathering her in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "I have a cabin 2 miles north. You are coming with me." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to assert some independence, but the truth was she could barely keep her eyes open. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving her boneless and exhausted. She found herself sinking against his broad chest, feeling the steady thud of his heartbeat through his coat. "What is your name?" she managed to ask as he carried her out into the brutal cold of the still falling snow. "Samuel," he said. "Samuel Thornton, Eleanor Walsh," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my life, Samuel Thornton." He looked down at her, something unreadable flickering in those gray eyes. "You can thank me by staying alive. Now save your strength. The walk is not easy." Eleanor wanted to stay conscious, wanted to see where he was taking her, but her body had other ideas. She felt herself slipping away despite her best efforts, lulled by the steady rhythm of his steps and the warmth of his body cutting through the cold. The last thing she registered was the sensation of being held securely, of being protected, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. When Eleanor woke, it was to warmth and the crackling of a fire. She was lying in a real bed, something she had not experienced since leaving Philadelphia, covered in heavy furs that smelled of pine and wood smoke. The ceiling above her was solid timber, well constructed and clearly meant to withstand the harsh mountain winters. She turned her head slowly, taking in her surroundings. The cabin was a single large room, but it was well organized and surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a proper fire blazing cheerfully. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment in neat rows. There was a table with 2 chairs, a cook stove, and various furs and hides hanging from the rafters. It was the home of someone who lived deliberately and carefully, someone who understood the wilderness and respected it. Samuel was sitting at the table, working on something with his hands. In the firelight, Eleanor could see him more clearly than she had during the rescue. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 30, though his face had the weathered quality of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His hands, she noticed, were scarred but capable, moving with practiced precision as he mended what looked like a leather harness. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He looked up immediately, setting aside his work. "About 12 hours. It is morning now, though you would not know it from the storm." He stood and moved to the cook stove, ladling something from a pot into a bowl. "You need to eat. You are half frozen and half starved." "I am not half starved," Eleanor protested, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Samuel's mouth. "Of course not." He brought the bowl to her along with a spoon and waited while she struggled to sit up. When she swayed, his hand was there immediately, steadying her shoulder. "Careful. You took a hard knock to your head, among other things." The soup was simple but delicious, rich with meat and vegetables that must have been precious this late in the winter. Eleanor ate slowly, feeling warmth spread through her body with each spoonful. Samuel returned to his chair but did not resume his work, instead watching her with that same unreadable expression. "Thank you," Eleanor said again when she had finished half the bowl. "I do not know how you found me, but I am grateful." "I heard the collapse," Samuel said. "Sound carries far in these mountains when you know how to listen. I came to investigate and saw the cave in. You live 2 miles away and you heard it. I was out checking my traps. I was closer than that." He paused, then added, "I knew someone had moved into the old Walsh place, but I had not seen you. I thought perhaps you had left before the winter set in." "I had nowhere else to go," Eleanor admitted. "That cabin was my inheritance, my only inheritance." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "Then I am sorry you lost it, but a building can be rebuilt. You cannot." "Can it?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, at the calluses she had earned through months of hard work. "I barely had enough supplies to make it through the winter as it was. I certainly do not have enough to rebuild and survive until spring." "You will stay here," Samuel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The storm is not finished yet. It could be days before it is safe to travel, and you have nowhere to go regardless. When the weather clears, we will salvage what we can from your cabin." "I cannot simply impose on you," Eleanor protested. "You are not imposing. I am offering." He stood again, moving to look out the small window at the wall of white beyond. "These mountains are not kind to people who try to face them alone. I learned that the hard way. I will not stand by and watch someone else make the same mistakes." There was a story there, Eleanor could tell, something painful buried beneath his gruff exterior. But she was too tired and too overwhelmed to press for details. Instead, she asked, "What mistakes did you make?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I came out here 5 years ago thinking I could escape everything I had left behind. I thought isolation was the answer. I was wrong. Isolation does not heal anything. It just gives your ghosts more room to haunt you." "Then why do you stay?" He turned to look at her, and she was struck by the raw honesty in his eyes. "Because eventually I learned the difference between isolation and solitude. One is running away. The other is finding peace. I found peace here, but it took a long time and cost more than I like to remember." Eleanor understood that, perhaps better than he knew. She had come to the mountains running away too, from expectations and disappointment and the suffocating weight of other people's plans for her life. She had told herself she was seeking freedom, but maybe she had just been seeking solitude without understanding what that truly meant. "I am sorry," she said quietly, "for whatever you lost." Samuel nodded, acknowledging her words without elaborating. "Get some rest. The storm is going to keep us inside for at least another day or two. You need to heal." Over the next 3 days, as the blizzard raged outside, Eleanor learned more about Samuel Thornton than she had learned about most people in years of acquaintance. He was not much of a talker, but he was a steady presence, and she found herself watching him as he went about his daily routines. He moved with the confidence of someone completely at home in his environment, whether he was cooking, repairing equipment, or simply sitting by the fire working on various projects. He had been a soldier, she learned, in the years after the war. He had seen things that haunted him still, though he did not speak of them directly. He had come west looking for space to breathe, for distance from the memories, and had found these mountains. He had built his cabin with his own hands, had learned to trap and hunt and survive through trial and error and help from the few other mountain men who lived in the high country. "You ever get lonely?" Eleanor asked on the third evening, as they sat by the fire after supper. Samuel considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is better than some alternatives. I tried living in towns after the war, could not stand it. Too many people, too much noise, too many expectations." "I understand that," Eleanor said. She was sitting in one of his chairs, her legs covered with a fur blanket. Her injuries had turned out to be mostly bruises and scrapes, painful but not serious. "Everyone in Philadelphia had an opinion about what I should do with my life. Marry this man, work this job, dress this way, speak that way. It was exhausting. So you came out here to get away from all that, and nearly killed myself in the process," Eleanor said with a rueful smile. "Not my most brilliant plan." "You survived a winter alone in the mountains," Samuel said. "That is more than most people could manage, especially someone who grew up in a city. You should be proud of that." The praise, simple and sincere, made Eleanor's chest feel warm. "I had help. There was a trapper who came through in the fall. He gave me advice on storing food and preparing for the weather. Old Bill Hutchinson. Yes, do you know him? Everyone in these mountains knows Bill. He has been working this territory for 40 years. Samuel stirred the fire with a poker, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "If Bill helped you, then you must have impressed him. He does not waste time on people he thinks are foolish." "I think he just felt sorry for me," Eleanor said. "Bill Hutchinson does not do anything out of pity." Samuel glanced at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "He must have seen something in you worth helping." Eleanor did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm finally beginning to quiet outside. The wind had dropped from a howl to a whisper, and the constant battering of snow against the walls had eased. "Storm is breaking," Samuel observed. "By tomorrow afternoon it should be clear enough to make it to your cabin. See what can be salvaged. Will there be anything left worth salvaging?" "Hard to say. But your supplies were stored, were they not? Root cellar, that sort of thing?" "Yes, I had everything I could in the cellar." "Then chances are good we can recover most of that. The food will keep you from starving at least." He paused, then added, "But you still cannot live there." "The cabin is destroyed. I know." Eleanor pulled the fur blanket tighter around herself. "I have been trying not to think about it." "You will figure something out," Samuel said. "You are tougher than you think." "How can you know that?" "You have only known me for 3 days, and I spent most of that time unconscious." "I know because you are still here." Samuel met her eyes across the fire. "You could have given up a dozen times over the last 6 months. Left when the first frost came, or when you realized how hard the work would be, or when the loneliness set in. But you did not. You stayed and you fought, and when your cabin came down on top of you, you held on until help came. That takes strength, Eleanor Walsh." Hearing her full name in his deep voice did something strange to Eleanor's heartbeat. She found herself looking at him properly for the first time, not just seeing the intimidating mountain man who had saved her life, but the person beneath. Samuel Thornton was handsome in a rough, weathered way, all strong lines and quiet intensity. His hands, scarred from work and weather, were capable and gentle. His eyes, which she had thought cold at first, held depths of understanding and pain and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. Not just saving me, but for this. For giving me a place to recover, for the food and the shelter and the kindness." "It is what anyone would do," Samuel said, but his voice had gone rough. "No," Eleanor said, "it is not. Most people would have helped me just enough to ease their conscience, then sent me on my way. You have given me your own bed, your own food. You have been patient and generous when you had no obligation to be." Samuel looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "The bed is yours for as long as you need it. I am fine with the furs by the fire." "That does not seem fair." "Fair has nothing to do with it. You are injured and you are my guest." His tone was firm, brooking no argument. Eleanor recognized the set of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared. Samuel Thornton was a man who, once he made a decision, would not be swayed. It was frustrating and oddly endearing at the same time. The next day dawned clear and brutally cold. The storm had left the world encased in white, with drifts piled as high as the cabin's roof in some places. Samuel spent the morning digging out the door and creating a path away from the cabin, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Eleanor watched from the window, marveling at his strength and stamina. When he came back inside, his face was red from the cold, but he looked satisfied. "We can make it to your place now. Are you well enough to walk?" Eleanor tested her legs, standing and taking a few careful steps. Everything ached, but nothing was unbearable. "I can manage. Take my arm if you need to. The snow is deep and the going is rough." They set out just after midday, with Samuel breaking trail and Eleanor following in his footsteps. He had insisted she wear his spare coat and gloves, both far too large for her but blissfully warm. The landscape was transformed by the snow, simultaneously beautiful and terrifying in its blankness. Eleanor tried not to think about what would have happened if Samuel had not found her, if she had been trapped alone beneath the collapsed roof. Her cabin, when they reached it, was worse than she had imagined. The entire structure had caved inward, leaving nothing but a pile of shattered timber and scattered belongings half buried in snow. Eleanor stood staring at the ruins, feeling something in her chest constrict painfully. This had been her dream, her fresh start, her bid for independence. Now it was nothing but wreckage. "Come on," Samuel said gently, his hand on her shoulder. "Let us see what we can recover." They worked through the afternoon, digging through the snow and debris. The root cellar, mercifully, had survived intact, and they were able to salvage most of Eleanor's food stores. Her clothes were scattered and damaged but not entirely destroyed. Some of her tools and cooking equipment were recoverable. But the books she had brought from Philadelphia, her mother's quilt, the few personal treasures she had owned, all were ruined by water and snow. Eleanor found herself holding the remains of her mother's quilt, the fabric frozen and torn, and felt tears burning in her eyes despite the cold. Her mother had died when Eleanor was 16, and this quilt had been the only thing she had left of her. "I am sorry," Samuel said quietly. He had been working nearby and must have seen her distress. "It is just a quilt," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, it is not." "It is a piece of your mother." Samuel crouched beside her in the snow. "I know what that is like. I lost everything of my family's in a fire during the war. I still think about the things I wish I had saved." Eleanor looked at him, seeing the understanding in his eyes. "How do you bear it?" "You carry what you can in here," he said, tapping his chest. "The memories, the love, the lessons they taught you, those cannot be destroyed by fire or snow or anything else." "I want something tangible," Eleanor whispered. "Something I can hold." Samuel reached out and carefully took a less damaged section of the quilt from her hands. "This piece is still good. I can cut it clean and you can keep it. It is not the whole quilt, but it is something." It was such a small gesture, such a practical solution, but it undid something in Eleanor's composure. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. She covered her face with her hands, embarrassed by her weakness but unable to stop the flood of emotion. She felt Samuel's arms come around her, strong and steady, pulling her against his chest. He did not say anything, did not tell her not to cry or that everything would be all right. He just held her, one large hand moving slowly up and down her back in a comforting rhythm, and let her grieve. When Eleanor finally pulled herself together, she found herself reluctant to leave the shelter of Samuel's embrace. He smelled of pine and smoke, and something uniquely himself, and his warmth cut through the cold better than any coat. But she forced herself to step back, wiping at her face with trembling hands. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You have earned the right to fall apart," Samuel said, "but we should head back. The sun is getting low and the temperature is dropping." They made 2 more trips over the next few days, recovering everything that could be salvaged from Eleanor's cabin. Samuel fashioned a sledge to help carry the supplies, and they hauled load after load back to his cabin. By the end of it, his orderly space was cluttered with her belongings, but he never complained or suggested she was imposing. "We will organize it properly," he said, looking at the piles of goods. "Make room for everything." "You keep saying we," Eleanor observed. "As though I am staying permanently." Samuel turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Where else would you go?" "I do not know. Back to Philadelphia, I suppose." "You want to go back to Philadelphia?" Eleanor thought about the crowded streets, the disapproving relatives, the suffocating expectations. "No," she admitted. "I really do not." "Then stay, at least until spring. You can decide what you want to do when the weather breaks and travel is possible again." Samuel hesitated, then added, "I would not mind the company." It was perhaps the most vulnerable thing he had said to her, and Eleanor felt her heart skip at the admission. Samuel Thornton, who valued his solitude and had built a life around self-sufficiency, was asking her to stay. Not out of obligation or pity, but because he wanted her there. "I do not want to be a burden," Eleanor said carefully. "You are not a burden. You pull your weight, you are good company, and this cabin is big enough for 2 if we are both willing to share the space." He met her eyes. "I am willing if you are." Eleanor felt a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "Then I will stay, at least until spring." As winter deepened, Eleanor and Samuel fell into a comfortable routine. She took over most of the cooking, having more experience with varied meals than Samuel, who had lived primarily on game meat and simple stews. In return, he taught her the skills she would need to truly survive in the mountains: how to read the weather, how to track animals, how to move silently through the forest, how to find food even in the dead of winter. They worked together to reorganize the cabin, building additional shelves and storage to accommodate Eleanor's belongings alongside Samuel's. The space that had been designed for one person's solitude gradually transformed into a shared home. Eleanor hung her spare dress on a peg near the fire to air out. Samuel moved his shaving supplies to make room for her hairbrush and pins. Small compromises and adjustments that spoke of something deeper than mere cohabitation. Eleanor found herself watching Samuel more and more, noticing the way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt when he chopped wood, the concentration on his face when he worked on delicate repairs, the rare but genuine smiles that sometimes crossed his features. He was beautiful in his own rough way, like the mountains themselves, and she was increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or practicality. For his part, Samuel seemed equally aware of her. She would catch him watching her as she worked, his gray eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her skin feel warm. When they passed each other in the confined space of the cabin, she was hyper-aware of every accidental touch, every moment when their hands brushed or their bodies came close together. The tension built slowly, a gradual warming like the promise of spring. They talked more as the weeks passed, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Eleanor learned about Samuel's family farm in Ohio, destroyed during the war. She learned about his time as a soldier, the things he had seen that still gave him nightmares. She learned about his decision to come west, to find something clean and new away from the ruins of everything he had known in return. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother who had encouraged her to read and learn despite her father's disapproval, about her father's death when she was 19, and the slow realization that his family had never really accepted her mother, who had been a seamstress before her marriage, about the loneliness of being neither wealthy enough to belong to society nor poor enough to fit in with the working class. "I always felt like I was between worlds," Eleanor admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, "not quite belonging anywhere." "And now?" Samuel asked. Eleanor looked around the cabin at the life they had built together over the past weeks. "Now I think maybe I am finding where I belong." Samuel's eyes held hers for a long moment. "I hope so," he said quietly, "because I find I very much like having you here." The confession hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Eleanor's heart was racing, but before she could formulate a response, Samuel stood abruptly and announced he was going to check the trap lines. He was out the door before she could say anything, leaving her staring after him in confusion and frustration. He returned hours later after dark, with 2 rabbits and a strange tension in his shoulders. He cleaned the game in silence, then began preparing it for cooking with more focus than the task required. Eleanor watched him, trying to understand what had changed, what had sent him fleeing into the cold. "Samuel," she said finally, "did I say something wrong earlier?" His hand stilled on the knife. "No. Then why did you leave so suddenly?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. When he did speak, his voice was rough. "Because I wanted to kiss you, and I was not sure I had the right." Eleanor's breath caught. She stood slowly, moving around the table until she was standing beside him. "What if I wanted you to kiss me?" Samuel turned to look at her, his gray eyes searching her face. "Do you?" "Yes," Eleanor said simply. He set down the knife with careful precision, then turned fully toward her. His hands, still slightly damp from washing the game, came up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind to pull away. She did neither. When Samuel's lips met hers, it was like touching fire. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Eleanor's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, and she pressed closer. Samuel made a low sound in his throat and pulled her against him, one arm banding around her waist while his other hand tangled in her hair. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Samuel's thumb traced her cheekbone with aching tenderness. "Eleanor," he said, her name a reverent whisper. "I know," she said, understanding without words. She felt it too, this thing growing between them that was already too big to ignore, too powerful to deny. "I did not plan this," Samuel said. "I did not bring you here thinking anything like this would happen." "I know that too." Eleanor smiled, cupping his bearded jaw in her hand. "But it is happening anyway." "What do we do about it?" "We could stop," Eleanor said, though the idea made her chest ache. "Pretend this never happened. Go back to being just 2 people sharing a cabin for the winter." "Could you do that?" Samuel asked. Eleanor thought about it honestly. She thought about going back to carefully maintain distance, to pretending she did not notice everything about him, to ignoring the way her heart leapt whenever he smiled. "No," she admitted. "I do not think I could. Neither could I." Samuel kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense. "I want this, Eleanor, I want you. But I need you to be sure, because once we start down this path, I am not going to want to turn back." "I am sure," Eleanor said. "I have never been more sure of anything." The rest of the winter passed in a kind of blissful cocoon. Samuel and Eleanor grew closer with each passing day, their relationship deepening from friendship into something that felt both brand new and ancient. As though they had been building toward this moment since the day he pulled her from the wreckage. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of shared life blending seamlessly with growing passion. Samuel was a remarkably tender lover despite his rough exterior, always gentle with Eleanor, always attentive to her needs and responses. In the warmth of the cabin, shielded from the harsh winter world outside, they explored what it meant to truly know another person, to trust and be trusted in return. But it was not just physical. They talked for hours, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears. Samuel spoke more openly now, letting Eleanor see the wounds the war had left on his soul. She listened and offered comfort, but she also shared her own vulnerabilities. The ways growing up feeling unwanted had shaped her into someone who struggled to believe she deserved happiness. "You deserve everything good," Samuel told her one night as they lay tangled together under the firs. "You deserve to be loved and cherished and protected. You deserve to build the life you want." "So do you," Eleanor said, tracing patterns on his chest. "You did not deserve what the war did to you. Maybe not. But it led me here, to these mountains, to this cabin." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "To you, and I cannot bring myself to regret the path that brought me to you." Eleanor kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the contact. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, "I love you, Samuel Thornton." She felt his whole body go still, then his arms tightened around her almost convulsively. "I love you too," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "God, Eleanor, I love you so much it terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I lost everything once before. My family, my home, my sense of who I was. I built this new life from nothing, and it felt safe because I had nothing left to lose. But now I have you, and the thought of losing you makes me want to hide you away from the world where nothing can touch you." Eleanor understood the impulse, but she also knew it was not the answer. "You cannot protect me from everything. Bad things happen. Roofs collapse, storms come, people die. But we face it together. That is what love means. Not hiding from the world, but being brave enough to face it knowing you might get hurt." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he nodded. "You are right, and you are braver than I am." "We are both brave enough," Eleanor said. "That is what matters." As winter began to loosen its grip, and the first hints of spring appeared in longer days and slightly warmer temperatures, Samuel and Eleanor began to talk seriously about the future. Eleanor's plan to return to Philadelphia had been completely abandoned. She had no desire to return to her old life, not when she had built something so much better here. "I want to rebuild my cabin," she said one evening. "On my land, I mean. Make it properly the way it should have been built the first time." Samuel looked up from the harness he was repairing. "That is a big undertaking." "I know, but that land is mine and I want to make something of it, not to live separately from you," she added quickly. "But maybe we could build something bigger, a proper house that would belong to both of us." "You want to build a house with me?" Samuel asked carefully. "I want to build a life with you," Eleanor said. "The house is just part of that, but yes, if you want the same thing." Samuel set aside his work and crossed to her, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. "I want everything with you. A house, a life, a future. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to see you laugh and watch the seasons change reflected in your eyes. I want to grow old with you in these mountains. Is that a proposal, Samuel Thornton? It is a promise, Samuel said. I am promising you my life, my love, my protection and partnership for as long as we both live. If you want a formal proposal, I can do that. Get down on one knee and say all the proper words. But what I am offering you is bigger than that. I am offering you everything I am and everything I have. Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. I accept your promise, and I give you mine in return. My life, my love, my partnership for all the days we have. That is what I want, Samuel, just that, just us, building something good and true together. They married in the spring, in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who made rounds through the mountain settlements. There were no fancy clothes or elaborate celebrations, just their spoken vows witnessed by the mountains and sky. Old Bill Hutchinson showed up unexpectedly, having heard through the mountain grapevine that Eleanor Walsh had survived the winter and was marrying Samuel Thornton. Knew you had it in you, girl, Bill said, slapping Eleanor on the back hard enough to make her stagger. Took guts to stick out the winter alone and even more guts to throw your lot in with this hermit. He jerked his thumb at Samuel. This hermit saved my life, Eleanor pointed out. And you saved his right back, Bill said knowingly. Man cannot live alone forever, makes him strange. You are good for him, and he is good for you. That is how it should be. They spent the spring and summer building their new house on Eleanor's land. Samuel designed it with an engineer's eye for strength and practicality, making sure the roof would withstand even the worst winter storms. They felled trees and hauled timber, dug foundations and raised walls. It was back-breaking work, but they did it together, and watching their house take shape was deeply satisfying. Other mountain folk stopped by occasionally to help. A loose community of trappers and hunters and hardy families who understood that survival in this harsh land depended on neighbors helping neighbors. Eleanor made friends with a woman named Martha who lived 10 miles south with her husband and 3 children. Martha was delighted to have another woman within visiting distance and immediately declared Eleanor her friend. It gets lonely being the only female for miles around, Martha confided during one visit. Men are fine, but they do not always understand the need for conversation and companionship. Eleanor understood completely. As much as she loved Samuel, it was nice to have female friendship too, to talk about things that interested women specifically. She and Martha began a pattern of monthly visits, weather permitting, and Eleanor found herself less isolated than she had been even in Philadelphia. The house was completed by late summer, a sturdy 2-room structure with a proper cellar and a loft for storage. Samuel built Eleanor a real bed frame, carved with simple but elegant designs. Eleanor sewed curtains and cushions, making the space into a real home. They moved Samuel's belongings from his old cabin, which they decided to keep as a storage space and emergency shelter. "Look at what we built," Eleanor said one evening as they stood outside admiring their work. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A real home. Samuel wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "We built more than a home. We built a life." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "We did." That first winter in their new house was nothing like the previous one. Eleanor was warm and safe, with plenty of supplies and a solid roof overhead. Samuel was attentive and loving, making sure she wanted for nothing. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading aloud to each other from the few books they owned. Samuel taught Eleanor to whittle, and she discovered she had a talent for carving small animal figures. "These are good," Samuel said, examining a rabbit she had carved. "You could sell these in town if you wanted." "You think so? I know so. People like handwork, especially in the winter when there is not much to do. Come spring, we could take some to Kelton, see if any of the merchants are interested." It was a small thing, but it made Eleanor feel useful in a way she had not since leaving Philadelphia. She was not just surviving here. She was building something, creating value, contributing to their household in meaningful ways. She spent the winter carving a whole menagerie of animals, constantly improving her technique. Spring came early that year, the snow melting rapidly and the flowers blooming in cheerful profusion. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in April, a realization that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told Samuel one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, his eyes locked on hers. "A baby." "Yes. Are you happy?" Samuel stood slowly, then crossed to her and pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I never thought I would have any of those things again." "So you are not frightened, terrified," Samuel admitted, "but also happier than I have ever been. We are going to be parents." They spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Samuel built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was silky to the touch. Eleanor sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. Martha came to visit more frequently, offering advice and reassurance based on her own experiences with childbirth. "You will be fine," Martha said firmly. "You are strong, and Samuel will take good care of you, and I will be here when your time comes if the weather allows." The baby, a girl with Eleanor's dark hair and Samuel's gray eyes, was born in October during an early cold snap. The birth was difficult and frightening, but Martha was there as promised, along with an older woman named Agnes who served as the area's midwife. Samuel paced outside for hours until Martha finally called him in to meet his daughter. "She is perfect," Samuel whispered, staring down at the tiny bundle in Eleanor's arms. "She is absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Eleanor asked, exhausted but happier than she could express. Samuel thought for a moment. "What was your mother's name, Catherine?" "Then Catherine she is, Catherine Thornton." He reached out a tentative finger and stroked his daughter's cheek. "Hello, Catherine. I am your father, and I promise to protect you and love you every day of your life." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband meet his daughter for the first time. This was everything she had never dared to dream of. A loving husband, a beautiful baby, a home built with her own hands in a place of raw beauty and possibility. She had come to the mountains running from one life and had somehow stumbled into another, better one. The years that followed were not easy. Mountain life never was. There were hard winters and lean times, sicknesses and injuries, and the constant challenges of survival in a harsh environment. But Eleanor and Samuel faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. Catherine grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then a bright child who loved the mountains as much as her parents did. Samuel taught her to track and hunt and read the weather. Eleanor taught her to read and write and do sums, determined that her daughter would have the education she herself had fought for. When Catherine was 3, a son joined the family. They named him Matthew, and he inherited Samuel's size and strength along with Eleanor's quick mind. The house that had seemed spacious for 2 became cozy with 4, filled with the noise and chaos of family life. Samuel expanded the house, adding another room and a larger loft. Eleanor's carved animals had indeed proven popular in Kelton, and she had a small but steady income from her crafts. Samuel's trapping was consistently successful, and they were able to build up savings for the first time. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure in ways that would have seemed impossible that first terrible winter. Old Bill Hutchinson became a regular visitor, adopting the role of honorary grandfather to the children. He taught Catherine how to set snares and told both children outrageous stories about his adventures in the mountains. Samuel and Eleanor watched with amusement as the gruff old trapper was wrapped completely around the children's little fingers. "Never thought I would see Bill Hutchinson playing tea party with a 4-year-old girl," Eleanor said one afternoon, watching through the window as Bill sat cross-legged on the ground, Catherine pouring imaginary tea into tin cups. "Never thought I would see myself doing it either," Samuel said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "But here we are." "Here we are," Eleanor agreed, leaning back against him, "building a life I never imagined possible. Do you ever regret leaving Philadelphia?" Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "Never, not for a single moment. Everything I want is right here." Samuel kissed her soft and sweet. "Everything I want is right here too." When Catherine was 7 and Matthew 4, disaster struck again. A fire broke out in the forest during a dry summer, spreading rapidly through the underbrush. Samuel spotted the smoke early and made the decision to evacuate immediately. They loaded essential supplies and the children onto their horses and rode hard for the Hutchinson place, which was farther from the fire's path. They watched from miles away as flames consumed acres of forest. Eleanor clutched Samuel's hand, terrified that they were about to lose everything they had built. But Samuel had chosen their building site wisely, near a creek with cleared land around it, and though the fire came close, it ultimately swept past without destroying their home. "We were lucky," Samuel said as they surveyed the damage days later. The forest around their house was scorched, but the buildings themselves had survived. "But we will need to be more careful, clear more land, create better fire breaks." They spent the rest of the summer and fall implementing Samuel's fire safety plans, working harder than ever to protect their home. The children helped in small ways, and Eleanor was struck by how much they had grown, how capable and confident they were becoming. "They are mountain children," Martha observed during a visit, "born to this life in ways we never were. It is in their blood." Eleanor knew it was true. Catherine and Matthew moved through the wilderness with an ease she had never achieved, reading signs and navigating terrain like they had been doing it forever. They were growing up with freedoms and experiences city children could never know, and Eleanor was grateful for that. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel's hair began to gray at the temples, though he remained as strong and capable as ever. Eleanor's hands grew more calloused and weathered, but she wore them as badges of honor. They had earned every line and scar through honest work and genuine living. When Catherine turned 15, a young man from one of the other mountain families began showing interest. His name was James, and he was polite and hardworking, but Eleanor was not ready for her daughter to grow up yet. Samuel handled it with more grace, sitting down with James and making it clear that Catherine was too young for serious courting, but that he was welcome to visit in company with the family. "She is just a child," Eleanor protested after James left. "She is 15, Samuel said gently. "The same age you said you were when your mother died, not a child anymore, even if we want to keep her as one." "I do not like it." Samuel pulled Eleanor into his arms. "Neither do I, but we raised her right. She has good sense and she knows her own mind. We have to trust that when the time comes, she will make good choices." When did you become so wise? Eleanor asked, only half joking. The day I dug you out of that collapsed cabin, Samuel said. Everything I have learned about love and trust and letting go I learned from you. Eleanor kissed him, grateful beyond words for this man who had saved her life and then given her a new one worth living. Catherine did not end up marrying James, though they remained friends. She was, as Samuel had predicted, perfectly capable of making her own decisions. She took her time, and when she finally did choose a husband at 19, it was a young doctor who had recently moved to the area. Eleanor approved wholeheartedly, and Samuel grudgingly admitted the man seemed acceptable. Matthew showed no interest in settling down, much more focused on exploring the mountains and learning everything there was to know about the wilderness. At 17, he was already being sought out by other trappers for his tracking skills and his uncanny ability to predict weather patterns. "He is you," Eleanor told Samuel one evening as they watched their son prepare for a solo expedition into the high country. "He has your love of solitude, your connection to these mountains. He has your courage," Samuel countered, "your willingness to face challenges head-on." "He has both of us," Eleanor said. "As he should." Life settled into a comfortable pattern as Eleanor and Samuel moved into their middle years. Their children were grown and building their own lives, but still close enough for regular visits. The house that had once seemed so ambitious now felt exactly right, filled with memories and love. Samuel's old cabin had been converted into a workshop where Eleanor continued her carving and Samuel repaired equipment. They had added a small barn for their animals and expanded their garden. The land that Eleanor had inherited, that had seemed so hostile and unforgiving that first winter, had been transformed into a true homestead. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Eleanor up to a high meadow where wildflowers grew in profusion. They sat together looking out over the valley, the mountains rising majestic in every direction. "You remember the day I found you?" Samuel asked. "Every detail," Eleanor said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then I heard your voice. I remember seeing the collapsed cabin and thinking I was too late, that whoever had been inside was already gone." Samuel took her hand, threading their fingers together. "When I heard you cry out when I knew you were alive, something shifted in me. I did not understand it then, but I was already falling in love with you. I fell in love with you when you held me while I cried over my mother's quilt," Eleanor said. "When you understood what I had lost and did not try to minimize it or tell me to be strong. You just let me grieve." 20 years, Samuel mused. 20 years since I pulled you out of the snow. 20 years of building this life together. 20 years of love, Eleanor said, and hopefully 20 more and 20 after that. Samuel smiled, pulling her close. "I will take as many years as fate gives us, as long as they are with you." They sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Eleanor thought about the young woman she had been, desperate and determined and so terribly alone. She thought about the risk she had taken, coming west with nothing but a dream and an inheritance of dubious value. She thought about how close she had come to dying in that collapsed cabin, and she thought about everything that had come after. The love she had found, the family she had built, the life she had carved out of this beautiful, brutal wilderness. She had come to the mountains running from something and had found everything she never knew she needed. "Thank you," she said to Samuel. "For what?" "For digging me out. For never letting me go back, for giving me this life." Samuel kissed her temple. "Thank you for staying, for building this with me, for teaching me that love is worth the risk of loss." They sat together as the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting. The mountains rose around them, permanent and unchanging, bearing silent witness to their love story. The years continued to pass, gentle and sweet. Samuel and Eleanor grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their house always open to family who visited regularly. Catherine's medical training as a doctor's wife proved invaluable to the mountain community, and she often consulted with Eleanor on herbal remedies and traditional healing methods. Matthew never did marry, preferring his solitary explorations, but he remained devoted to his parents and visited often with stories of his adventures. Old Bill Hutchinson passed away peacefully at the remarkable age of 87, surrounded by the Thornton family he had adopted as his own. They buried him on a high ridge overlooking the valley, and Samuel carved a marker from mountain stone. Martha and her family remained close friends, their children intermarrying with the Thorntons until the family trees became thoroughly tangled. The mountain community that had seemed so sparse and isolated when Eleanor first arrived had grown into a real network of families and friends, all supporting each other through the challenges of wilderness life. Eleanor's hands eventually grew too arthritic for the delicate work of carving, but she took up storytelling instead, entertaining her grandchildren with tales of the old days. Her story of the collapsed cabin and the mountain man who saved her became a family legend, told and retold with increasing embellishment by successive generations. Samuel remained strong well into his 60s, still chopping wood and checking trap lines, but even he eventually had to slow down. He spent his later years maintaining their homestead with Matthew's help, taking pride in the legacy they had built. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a surprise celebration. Nearly 30 people gathered at the Thornton homestead, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. Eleanor stood in the middle of the chaos, watching her family interact, and felt her heart might burst with happiness. Samuel found her standing by the window and wrapped his arms around her from behind, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their decades together. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am the luckiest woman who ever lived," Eleanor said. "Look at all this. Look at what we made." "You made it," Samuel said. "You brought life and love to these mountains. I was just surviving before you came. You taught me how to actually live." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at his weathered face. His hair was completely gray now, his beard shot through with white, but his eyes were the same storm gray that had captivated her 40 years earlier. "We taught each other," she said. "That is what partners do." They kissed, oblivious to the teasing calls from their grandchildren, lost in the moment and in each other. Eleanor lived to see her 80th birthday, a remarkable age for anyone but especially for someone who had spent most of their life in the harsh mountain environment. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, telling stories and offering advice and loving her ever-expanding family with all her heart. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, Samuel was devastated but not destroyed. He had had 45 years with the love of his life, and he was grateful for every single day. He lived another 3 years, cared for by his children and grandchildren, before joining Eleanor in the small family cemetery on the ridge. They were buried side by side, their graves marked with stones that Matthew carved himself. The inscriptions were simple but meaningful. Eleanor's read, "She came to the mountains seeking freedom and found love." Samuel's read, "He dug her out and never let her go." The Thornton homestead remained in the family for generations, passed down through Catherine's line. The house Samuel and Eleanor built together stood strong for over 100 years, a testament to the solid foundation they had laid. Even when it was eventually replaced with a more modern structure, pieces of the original were preserved and incorporated, keeping that connection to the past alive. The story of Eleanor and Samuel became a cherished family history, told to each new generation. The tale of the young woman whose roof collapsed under 3 feet of snow and the mountain man who saved her life and won her heart. It was a story of courage and resilience, of taking chances and building something beautiful from adversity. But more than that, it was a love story. A testament to the power of 2 people finding each other against all odds and choosing to build a life together. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, that disaster can be the doorway to destiny. In the end, Eleanor and Samuel's legacy was not just the homestead they built or the family they raised, but the love they shared. A love that started with a rescue and grew into a partnership that lasted a lifetime. A love that transformed 2 lonely souls into a family, 2 separate lives into one beautiful shared existence. They had started with nothing but snow and ruins and the courage to try again. They had built everything that mattered from those unpromising materials. And in doing so, they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. A story of love that conquered mountains, weathered storms, and proved that sometimes the best adventures begin with the worst disasters. The mountains that had witnessed their first meeting stood eternal and unchanging, but they held the memory of Eleanor and Samuel within their stones and soil. Every wildflower that bloomed in the spring meadows, every pine tree that reached for the sky, every stream that flowed clear and cold through the valleys carried a piece of their story. Future generations of Thorntons would walk the same trails Samuel once walked, would see the same mountain views that took Eleanor's breath away, would feel the same sense of belonging that the couple had found in this wild, beautiful place. And they would know that it all started with a blizzard, a collapsed cabin, and a mountain man who refused to let a stranger die alone in the snow. That was the true beginning of everything. The moment Samuel heard the collapse, the moment he started digging, the moment he pulled Eleanor into the light and decided, without even knowing it yet, that he was never going to let her go. That single act of salvation had rippled out across decades, creating waves that touched dozens of lives and built a legacy of love and strength and resilience. Eleanor Walsh had come to the mountains seeking independence and ended up finding something far more valuable, a partnership that made her stronger than she ever could have been alone. Samuel Thornton had retreated to the wilderness seeking solitude, and ended up discovering that the right person made isolation transform into intimacy, loneliness into love. Together, they had taken the raw materials of their broken pasts and their uncertain presents and had forged them into a future worth living. They had proven that it was never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to build something meaningful. And so their story endured, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, that courage and love and determination can overcome any obstacle, that 2 people, working together, can build anything they can dream of. The mountains kept their secrets and their stories, but Eleanor and Samuel's tale was written in every stone of the foundation they had laid, every tree they had planted, every child they had raised. It was a story that would never truly end, because love like theirs did not die with the people who felt it. It lived on in the family they created, in the land they tended, in the community they helped build. Her roof had caved in under 3 feet of snow. He had dug her out and never let her go back. And from that desperate beginning, they had built a love story for the ages, a testament to the human capacity for resilience, transformation, and enduring devotion. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. It was, in the end, the best kind of story. One that was absolutely true, and absolutely extraordinary, and absolutely theirs.